was very curious about the premise of the American Dream, and I wanted to do a little bit of research around what the American Dream was at the onset of this country, like what was the intention of the American Dream.
The point in your life where you finally have the wisdom from all your past mistakes, and you still have enough time to make up and actually still create the life you want to live.
Rasmussen reports found that support for radical socialist policies and candidates appear high among likely voters under the age of 40.
Welcome to Montana Whiskey, Wealth and Freedom.
Well, I'm betting in love. I've been on the ground, but gotten back on my feet. Just fall back down on my knees for you and your whiskey under the bridge.
I wanted to start off, I'm going to talk, there's about 3, maybe 4 different things I want to touch on. And it's going to be very interesting to see how the flow goes, because the one thing that I have come to realize in prepping for these shows is that we're going to end up repeating a lot of our conversations and talking about a lot of the same stuff. It's just that every time, because it's such a deep rabbit hole. So a lot of times every conversation I think deserves multiple trips around the sun, around the table, I guess, in order to really get it really fully covered and fleshed out. Because, there's no way, it's just not feasible for us to cover everything in one.
You know what's fun about that, though?
What?
There's an image that I've seen before that talks about the learning, like how we learn is circular, but it's circular in like an upward pattern. So like you can revisit, you never step in the same river twice. You never read the same book twice. Like as you're learning, every time we get into something a little deeper or whatever, it just kind of brings your knowledge. Even if it feels like you're circling back, you're up the next level, which I think is kind of a cool thing about discussions like these.
Yeah, and just quality content, because like there are so many things out there in any space, any industry, where you can go and you read it and it's like, okay, at that season that helped me, but never again, right? But you look at those more quality content hubs, it doesn't matter how many times you go back through it, it's gonna add value again.
Yeah, you learn something new every single time because your mind is that much more open the next time.
Yeah, but not all content does that for
sure.
you.
Well, it's important for me to think about it that way, because I have to just, when I'm doing show prep, I have to just kind of take a breath and say, you don't have to have such a well-constructed plan that you are going to cover everything in an hour and a half, right? So like it kind of sort of gives me the permission to skim a little bit, to skip across the surface of the water, knowing that at some point we'll get deeper. We're going to go deeper. But one of the things, Kyle, that has come up repeatedly in conversations that Karen and I have had with people is they have asked, rightfully so how is what you're doing on your show going to help me? Like, what is, and in reverse to that, one of the questions that I've been asking myself, and Karen and I have talked about a little bit, is like, it's probably mostly a conversation I've had in my head, but who's the ideal audience for this show, and also who is the ideal client ultimately for the advisors involved with the show, or as part of the audience of the show. And I really have gone through a little bit of a process in thinking through that, where we understand what it is that we're ultimately trying to provide for people from a solution standpoint, from an implementation standpoint, from an option standpoint, and some people that we talk to at face value may not be, from a cash flow perspective or from a monetary perspective, necessarily like a great fit for that. But I also kind of believe that first and foremost, what's most important about the audience that is the ideal audience for this show really does boil back to the mindset. It's all about finding the people that have the kind of mindset that we want to attract to the show, around the whole premise that we've talked about in the past with the new frontier and that pioneer mindset and the modern pioneer, the person that is interested in looking sort of outside of the system to find financial sovereignty and ownership over their life. And so really, I think to me that seems to be more critical than somebody's starting cash position. Now, ideally, some people are going to be more qualified than others as far as being able to actually benefit from the implementation of certain aspects of what you have to offer or what the show has to offer, from an advisory standpoint. But my question for you two is, when you thinking about the mindset aspect of the show, and I picked 3 specific things that make up what I think are important components to mindset. This is not an all-inclusive list. There are other things that should be on this list that I didn't include, but I just wanted to just cherry pick 3 and just have conversation around those 3. The first one is vision. The importance of people having a vision. And I guess my question is, again, tying it back to the show, is when you're paralleling what we're trying to cover story-wise around the Oregon Trail and the 1883 fictional story with the Duttons, and they ended up with the Yellowstone Dutton Ranch. That was sort of the vision. That was the culmination of their vision, of James Dutton's vision. And what I always wanted to believe, and I want to believe, is that everybody has their own version of that Yellowstone Dutton Ranch for them, whatever that looks like. But they've got to have that vision of what they're journeying towards initially. So my question about vision for you two, in your experiences with the people that you've dealt with, how have you experienced that in conversation with people? Do you find that most people that you talk to that you are successful in being able to help have a vision versus a lot of the people that you have talked to that where it doesn't finish, where the conversation doesn't comes to an end without helping them? Do you find that that one of the problems that you discover with those people is that they don't begin the conversation with any kind of vision of what they want the end of their journey to look like?
I think vision is absolutely critical, and growing up, being involved in a lot of leadership forward, vision forward content, I would have said that I had a clear vision, even as a young teenager, of what I wanted. And then we moved towards that, right? But in order to to be willing to have your paradigm changed, I think we have to be willing to, we've got to know why we're even entertaining that. We have to understand what's wrong today, right? I think that for the clients that I've seen, they think they have the vision. They're excited about the future of what infinite banking provides, of what owning your life versus renting it can really accomplish. But they've never really lost anything. They've never had a lot of pain, I guess. And so some of these younger folks that I've worked with that I get really excited about, because I'm like, man, you're young. You will win in levels that you cannot even imagine if you start. I know this because I look at where I was 5 years ago. It's completely different than where I am today. Because they don't have that pain that says, no, I understand why this is actually a need. Their vision hasn't been really honed. They don't know why they're trying to pursue whatever it is. They like it, right? It's fun. And I think that if we don't have that element of the refinement of our vision through obstacles and trials and all of that stuff, we may still have what we think is a vision, but it's not super clear to us. And it's not a need. It's just a desire. Does that make sense?
And there's not enough emotional energy behind that desire. That people are more motivated by the pain than they are by the pursuit of
right. And so they
something
might
they
have,
desire, like a pleasure.
Yeah, it might be like, I want that because it's fun and all this other stuff. But that person who says, I want that because it's the future that would, like, if I had it in my life, it would have stopped me from ever experiencing this pain that I already experienced, and I do not want to experience that again. In fact, I will not experience that again. Therefore, I am going to move forward with this because I have to. Like, I'm not going to allow myself to be in this position again. And so I find with, I'll just assign arbitrary ages to this, because this is not arbitrary, sorry, general ages to this, but folks that are 25 and up, or even 30 and up, seem to have that clarity a little bit more. And I would say up to, at least the folks that I've worked with, up to like the age 50 range, 55 range. And then it seems like past that, people start wondering again, like, what am I doing? What's the future look like? I'm trying to retire. Like, they're looking at a whole different landscape of whatever. Their vision is different now. It's less active or whatever it might be. And then people on the younger side of it, they just haven't gone through some of those things that are really formative in helping refine that vision to where they can move forward quickly.
So you're talking about people under 25 that don't have that vision.
Yeah.
So you're in your experience, people really don't come into, they don't have enough worldly experience or life experience until they're at least 25 and older, before they really have gone through enough to where they can start to be motivated differently.
Yeah, I would say they're motivated at a higher level. Now, obviously, there's people that are below that range that know what they want. They're going to go get what they want. And you look at those people's lives and they have experienced that pain, right? Like, they may have come from split families. They may have come from homelessness. They may have come from whatever. And they said, dog eat dog, hungriest dog eats, whatever, however you want to phrase it. They've already gone through all of that. They've had that pain to really say, now I know that I'll never be in this again. I know guys in their 20s that have created like at 20 have created massive impact and cash flow and all that other stuff because their childhood was that. Like, they had that reason to move into something bigger. They had that reason behind the vision. And I think that when we don't have the reason behind the vision, it's really hard to move with determination towards that goal.
Would it be fair to say that those outliers, those younger people that move into it more quickly, they were forced to grow up faster? Yeah. How about you, Karen? What's been your experience? Do you feel that with people you talk to on the mortgage purchasing side or home buying side, that a lot of people, when they are making the purchasing decision, they do it with some kind of vision in mind? Or do you feel like it's more reactive as opposed to proactive?
I think from what I see, it's a little different because I see such a big, broad spectrum of people. Most Americans ultimately want to own a home. And so they're more of a...
do or don't?
Do want to own a home. And so they're more of like just everybody you'd meet. So they're more of an actual vision of who you encounter anyway. And I would say that the vast majority of people don't have any vision for their lives past the simple things that society has told them of: you should have a home and you should max out your 401k and you should retire at 65. And they never actually think about what they want. And so they're just going through the motions of, well, yes, owning a home is a step in it. And they might have a vision of the home they want and then see if that matches up with their qualifications. But they aren't really thinking about their vision for their life because they're just living a life that they've been told that they're supposed to live. And that's a really interesting one for me. I I feel like the people who are actually the most, if you're going to age group, trying to get out of that is actually our age group, the Gen Xers. And I don't know if it's because I am in that. And so I have generally more interaction with that. But I was just doing a part on what I call, the third quarter. And I was talking about it's the point in your life where you finally have the wisdom from all your past mistakes. Mm-hmm. And you still have enough time to make up and actually still create the life you want to live. And that's actually the time where they're going, wow, I've worked this job I absolutely hate. But, 65, geez, am I really just going to do nothing after that? So maybe I can actually start working towards spending the rest of my life doing something I actually enjoy and actually building. Now they start thinking about vision. What do I want it to be? Because what does, especially with how long people live now, and they see their parents living into their 90s, 100, and they're like, wow, I don't want to spend, if I retire at 65, just that many years in retirement. And so they actually start, to me, that's when they start coming up with a vision. But I always think, gosh, if we all had our own vision, our own Oregon Trail, instead of just doing what we're told to do, the whole keeping up with the Joneses thing, I think is unfortunately most people's vision. Well, I'm doing this because I don't know my friends are.
What was, I forget the person who said it, but it was 85% of people, 5% of people think, 10% of people think they think, and then 85% of people would rather die than think, right? And I think about that with vision too, is, you were mentioning, John, that everyone has their own version of the ranch, the Dutton Ranch. Mm-hmm. I think for a lot of people, that is, can I eat tomorrow? And can I watch my movies tomorrow? And can I see my friends tomorrow? Like, that's what we're living for, right? Is our community and our pleasure. It's not necessarily a big vision for everybody. And like you said, that vision, you can take that vision and say everyone has their own. Most people aren't thinking about it in terms of a vision, though. They're just thinking about it in terms of survival or pleasure or whatever it might be. So, I don't know. That's my perspective on it. But again, it's not like I know a huge, vast majority of the people out there.
I think both of you touched on different things that actually are very relevant to what we're going to jump into as one of the next points in the conversation. But before we go there, of the other ones, the other two mindset principles that I brought in with us or with me today, I think the only one I really want to ask you two about as well is courage. Because it's one thing to hit a point in your life, whether it's the third quarter, where you start to kind of think about your future a little differently because lack of time, or somebody that, to your example, that has opportunity from a youth standpoint because time's on their side, but really they have to come from a very specific place of not recreating the same kind of pain rather than just pursuing some level of pleasure. The question is even when somebody finally has that vision, whether it's forced or unforced, how many people actually do you find possess the courage to pursue it? Because I know both of you have experienced the same thing where you've gotten into the thick of it with somebody and you were really close to helping fulfill and see the beginning of the journey towards really that end result that they claimed that they wanted, but they bail because various reasons. But I wonder how much of that bailing out ends up, when push comes to shove, it does end up becoming a courage issue where taking that leap of faith into actually executing on the plan just becomes too much. Therefore, they don't.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that's so true, even if somebody somewhere in the back of their minds knows what they would like to do, they have some vision, they won't actually put it into words because in their own mind, they be bucking the system or going against the grain or all those things. And one of the things I love is everybody should have a big, hairy, audacious goal, that BHAG, and that you should have in mind. But that's scary, because if you have it and once you've stated it, now if you aren't working towards it, then you'll be questioning why. And actually, when the book you shared, Ownership, that's one of the things I really loved in there, was he was like, look, I don't care how ridiculous it seems, write it all down of everything you could ever possibly want, and then start actually, looking at it and deciding steps to get there. Because if you don't do that, it is always just going to stay a pipe dream. And that takes courage to actually, because nobody does it. Nobody's doing it. Everybody's just living in the, gotta live within your means, but like in the small box of how everybody else does it, which is ultimately making others wealthy.
We're herd animals. It's so easy to just go with the flow, and if we're not making waves, then we're not bothering anybody either, right? But if you're not making waves, nobody's surfing. So it's like, I don't know, it's really easy, and American culture makes it easy to be comfortable, but there are consequences to that. We just don't have to face them for a long time. And I think that we'd rather turn a blind eye and say, I hope the consequences aren't horrible in the future. But hope isn't a strategy. And so the people that we work with are the people that say, only dead fish go with the flow. And I don't go with the flow. I swim upward. And because those are the people that we primarily work with, obviously there's going to be people that come in that, after going through several meetings or whatever, it turns out that they thought they had a vision, they have a pipe dream. They don't really have that initiative, that courage to go do anything. Totally fine. They might in the future, but right now they don't. The reason why we like working with people who say, no, I do swim upstream and I have been swimming upstream for a long time, is because they're the ones that are going to go out and not stop when things get difficult. And they've already got, I don't know, hit in the face with everything that you could imagine. And every time you get hit, you just get back up and you keep moving forward. And that experience of getting knocked down and getting back up provides more and more courage for the next time and the next time and the next time. I think there's a reason why venture capitalists ask, like, one of their initial questions is, where have you failed? Tell me about your failures, because nobody wants to put money with someone who hasn't failed yet. That's a losing proposition.
Right. Yeah. Well, you made me think of the 5 character traits that I put together as sort of a package deal for sort of really describing that modern pioneer around this new frontier. 1 being resilience, 2 being self-reliant, 3 being, having grit and, not afraid of hard work or working hard. 4 is the vision, and this is not any particular order. And then 5th is, is having some sense of community, being community minded. And I have a whole, I won't get into it today, but I have a whole wood and fire analogy around wood and the importance of proximity, pieces of wood in relation to each other from as far as ignition goes. There's, too close and they smother each other, too far apart, and they really just.
You said we weren't going to get into it.
I know,
John. You just got into it.
I know, but I'm not. But that's all I'm going to say. That's it. I'm stopping right there. And I actually am going to touch on. I'm just going to say what the last one was. The mindset one was personal responsibility, and we're not going to talk about that one. But I mentioned it because this is the segue into our next part of the conversation. So. Karen knows about this. I want to share this with you. It's very likely you might not know about it, but I thought it was really cool. So, love them or hate them, Glenn Beck has come up with a new artificial intelligence that he calls George AI. Have you heard of this by chance?
Nope.
So he's kind of embarking on a new adventure where he's creating an opportunity to, he has the 3rd most comprehensive archive American archive, information archive in the country, next to the
Library of Congress.
Congress and the National Archive in D.C. It's massive and very extensive. And what he's done is he's put all of this information into his own firewalled artificial intelligence system or program. And basically what it does is it allows him and his team to have conversations with like the founders, like if they were still alive.
Yeah, they loaded up like all of George Washington's writings and that that you could find and all that kind of stuff, so that it would be trained on how George Washington thinks.
Yeah.
And then can respond accordingly.
Based on personal letters and the Federalist Papers and all the documentation that they were able to gather from that time period. But anyway, this was interesting. He did an interview with George Washington, the George AI version, and going back to the whole personal responsibility component to mindset. I'm going to read this real quick just because it's really interesting, but then this is going to be the segue into the next part of our conversation. So George AI said to Glenn, in response to one of Glenn's questions, he says, America's biggest problem isn't political or economic. It's all moral. You've drifted from the virtues that make liberty possible in the first place. To be free, you have to have discipline. You have to have faith. You have to have character. And if you don't have any of those things, laws can't stop anything, and they mean little. Government turns either weak or oppressive. You have grown skeptical of truth. You're reckless with debt. You're comfortable blaming instead of building anything. And in my time, we've understood that self-governance begins with self-control, which again, I think is very relevant to what we're talking about. Do you even recognize what self-control is? Public virtue matters more than public opinion. You keep electing these people, expecting things to change, but you haven't changed. The fix is not going to be found in Washington, D.C. It's going to be found in every home, every school, every heart. Where are the citizens who value duty over comfort, principle over popularity? America was built to be a moral and self-governing nation. It's only that foundation that will still save her. I just thought it was really cool, and it was kind of an interesting segue and a little bit of to me it fits very, very well with a lot of what we're trying to express and discuss and educate around with this show.
Yeah.
There's a lot of crossover there. So this is what's interesting. So with that said, and what both of you have shared around vision and courage, I want to share real quick this. This is a new poll as of September of this year, September 2025, by the Heartland Institute and Rasmussen Reports. Found that support for radical socialist policies and candidates appear high among likely voters under the age of 40. So in that poll that they conducted, 53% of likely voters aged 18 to 39 said they would like to see a Democratic socialist candidate win the 2028 presidential election. 76% said they somewhat or strongly agree that major industries like healthcare, energy, and big tech should be nationalized to give people more control and equity to the people. So it's very interesting to me because where George AI was just talking about that, what America's problem today is that it's lost its moral footing.
Yeah,
right. But then the question is asked, do you believe the United States is a fundamentally good, evil, or morally mixed country? Only 28% of the people polled believe that the United States is good. 17% think it's evil, and 50% are mixed, 5% not sure. Which I thought was very interesting because I think that with what we're talking about around, it's important, again, for people to have vision. It's important to have the courage to see that vision through, but it's really critical to have the personal responsibility and again, what George talked about, where to generalize, and people are, skeptical of the truth, reckless with debt, comfortable blaming instead of building. Self-governance begins with self-control. So if that's diagnosed as the problem of the country, but yet when you ask people, is the country moral or good or bad or whatever, they at least this age bracket is the 53% of them believe not moral or not good. And I think a lot of that has to do with cultural story shifting. I think that one of the other parts of the research that I did, and I apologize, guys, I'm kind of I'm sort of monopolizing the conversation here, but I got a lot of ground to cover. So, talking about why redistribution feels un-American but is growing in our country. And one of the things that it talks about is that when people perceive that opportunity isn't real, they shift toward demanding equality of outcome, which I think is one of the outcries that we hear from a lot of the younger people, mainly because they believe it's a rigged system. But what's interesting to me about that is the part where the 70, what was it, 70% of them agree that major industry should be nationalized. And I'm like, that doesn't square. Like, that doesn't make sense, because if you believe that it's a rigged system and that's what's creating the inequality in this country, then the last thing that you should want is actually more centralized industries within the system. Yeah.
Well, the funny thing about that is, so the last couple of programs, we've had a gal who's a friend of ours who is from the Soviet Union. She defected over here in the 90s. And so, so she is always really interesting to talk about from these kind of perspectives, because obviously she really gets what it looks like when the government supposedly can control and is making everybody equal. But, what does that actually look like when the only rich people are the ones in government? And so that is really interesting. It would be interesting to have that conversation with her around there, because again, it's really easy to sit there from their education books and say, oh yeah, that sounds great, that's how it should be, and the only thing that can equalize things is government. But they never actually go look at every single one, and they'll just say, well, America hasn't tried it yet, we could do it better.
Yeah, they've all failed.
Yeah.
If you want a very simple, and if the listeners want a very simple dissertation on redistribution, I would just challenge you to pick up the book. It's called The Pension Idea by Paul Poirot, written in 1950.
It's one of Nelson's recommendations.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. It's very good,
Yeah.
and it's simple. And the thing is, it was written at the time when pensions were starting. How long did it take pensions to disappear? Like, we don't have any companies starting pensions anymore. There are still companies that do have pensions because they were started, 20, 30 years ago or whatever. But it's been 70 years, and they're all but gone, because it's not a sustainable way to approach money. You cannot borrow from one generation borrow from a future generation to take care of the present generation. It doesn't work.
May I interject and correct you?
Yeah, go for it.
In the private sector, you are absolutely correct. But how many pension systems still
the government keeps propping them
exist
up
in the public
with
sector?
State government pensions.
When you have
and stuff.
taxpayer-funded pension plans,
They keep it going forever because it's all a Ponzi scheme.
Well, you can't give what you don't have.
Right.
And we're all relying on, I shouldn't say we're all relying, we tend to rely on the person that's providing for us to provide for us in the future. Whether that's a company or a government, it doesn't matter. So if the company knows that if I promise all of my employees a future guaranteed payment, they'll never leave. Like, what is that?
Right.
That's slavery.
Right.
They can't provide it today. They're promising to provide it in the future, and in turn, they're buying loyalty.
Right.
Which, if you want, it's easy to be a slave. You just do your work, right? Like, I've been a slave too. Like, it's normal. It's actually very normal to be indebted to somebody, even in our own mind or whatever. There's nothing wrong with it, unless you want to be free.
They would prefer, Kyle, that you refer to it as indentured
Indentured
servitude.
servitude.
Indentured servitude. I don't care. Slavery,
I'm
servitude,
joking.
it doesn't even matter.
Yeah, I
right?
know.
It's
It's-
all the same philosophy.
Right, I understand. I'm
And
being
so,
a smartass.
yeah, no, it's great. But companies have tried to do it, and it didn't work. The government does it, and it works. Why? Because they're able to continue to
Tax.
print money and tax the people.
Yep.
So is it actually working?
No.
No, because we're paying for
Right.
that service. It's not a true efficient monetary system, and it creates dependency. And so anything that creates dependency, like redistribution, is like top of the list.
Right. Well, and it's funny because like state pensions, I mean, that's because they don't have to rely on just their workforce. They're making all of us who aren't state workers pay for the state workers' pensions. So I
exactly.
mean, that's the only way that they've kept it going.
Yeah.
If it fails in the private sector, it probably should fail everywhere because then it's just not actually cash flowing.
And that goes straight back to responsibility. And I know you don't want to talk about it today. I want to talk about
No,
it.
no,
though.
no. We can talk about it. I just didn't
Yeah.
want to take the time at that point. I only because I wanted to get to this stuff first. And
Yeah, perfect.
It's all going to tie back in.
If we're not taking responsibility for our future, we have to ask someone else to. If we can't take responsibility for our spouses and our kids, how in the world can we take responsibility for our parents and our grandparents? Someone has to start. And if we rely on our companies or the government, then there's so many fallacies within that. That's why I love infinite banking, is because you can't do infinite banking and blame anyone else for your success or failure except yourself. It's 100% responsibility. And I mean, great resources out there on taking responsibility. If you've never read Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink, that's a wonderful book. Becoming Your Own Banker, talking about ownership, fantastic. But I also look at Think and Grow Rich as one of those books that really emphasizes
That's Napoleon Hill.
yeah, responsibility and taking ownership of the mindset and all that other stuff.
Yeah, and all of this this conversation, again, from a planning standpoint, it's all intentional because it all ties in together. It's a matter of how well your guys' show host does for tying it all together in a nice package. But you're right, Kyle. I mean, I knew that I didn't want to take the time to talk about responsibility then, because everything that we're going to talk about, that we are talking about and going to be talking about, that really all boils together in the same pot. But I wanted to really emphasize the irony of the polling data. And I really appreciate this, what you were sharing in the beginning about, from a vision standpoint, about the young people 25 and up. And I'm like, wow, because like that is another part of the thing that I struggle with, is like, what is the right, who is, who's the right demographic to really be more inclined to want to hear the messaging from the show. And when you read data like that polling data, you go, young people, I don't know that they want to hear this, because the last part I want to talk about is the concept of the American dream, because it's been brought up a couple of different times throughout the course of conversations on the show. And I was very curious about the premise of the American dream, and I wanted to do a little bit of research around what the American dream was at the onset of this country, like what was the intention of the American dream, and how was it described or defined today. But before we get into that, I do need a little bit more Bighorn bourbon, please.
You can't talk about the American dream without Bighorn bourbon.
No, I'm doing more talking than usual, so I'm thirsty. My throat is dry. I need some good. I would say it's good conversation fuel, but the more I drink,
The less coherent.
the harder conversation becomes. It seems a little contradictory, right? Like if I'm trying to have an intelligent show and conversation, the last thing you want to do is involve something that actually
That's plenty of ice for me.
makes you dumber, not smarter.
We
as
have
the show
had some of the
evolves.
most fascinating conversations when we happen to be
That's true. That's true.
personally.
That's what made us decide to combine whiskey and wealth conversations together.
It's
Was
our fireside conversation.
we've had some really great kind of
Anyone.
philosophical deep hole conversations.
That's great.
A little bourbon in our hand, but
It's a social lubricant. Remove a little bit of the edge on the filters, and then
Well, and it's just for the two of us, but honestly, I do think there's something to be said that sometimes it just opens, like you hear something a different way
yeah,
that you just do because it just kind of changes that.
we can tend to be stuck in our own mind and in a rut, So if something helps you get out of that,
so I was really fascinated by this, and I'm going to tie this back into the last part of that polling data that I extrapolated for a conversation for this show. But founders' concept versus today's perception around the American dream, and the shift between what was and what is in a single sentence, comparatively speaking. So the original dream, the original American dream, according to the founders' intention, was freedom to build the life you choose through personal responsibility, there it goes again, enterprise, and liberty. And then the modern dream, where after the shift occurred, and that can be very chronologically timelined, and you can see where that whole shift occurred. What has become the American dream has become a promise of economic comfort, home ownership, and status, usually accessed through institutional dependence and debt.
but just the beginning of that. Let's talk. Sorry,
Yeah.
the promise of economic comfort
Yep.
Comfort. Yeah.
Promise
Home
of
ownership.
home ownership, and status.
and status.
Yeah.
Who gives two craps about any of that? Like, we all do, but why does that matter? It's as a believer, right? Like, this is not my home. As a believer in God, like, my home is in the future, beyond death. Home ownership, economic comfort, those are all great, and I want to have those while I'm here, and I don't believe that that's there's no, as far as I'm aware, no spiritual reason to have or to not have any of that stuff. Everyone's called to different levels of ownership and all of that, but economic comfort, like, seriously?
Right.
That's the dream? The dream is to not have to struggle? That's pathetic.
But don't you think that's part of why the polling data is so interesting and ironic?
Yeah, right.
Because what they're saying. So answered by the 53% of the poll, the polling participants who would like to see a Democratic Socialist candidate win the 2028 presidential election. Among the following options, which best describes the biggest reason you would like to see a Democratic Socialist candidate win the 2028 presidential election? 31%, the top winner of it was housing costs are too high, which we need to talk more about that. The next 30 or 23% combined two different tax categories, but basically taxes are too low for corporations and too low for wealthy individuals, tax the rich. 8% want a single payer health care system, comfort. They believe that the economy unfairly benefits older, wealthier Americans, because again, this is a younger demographic that's being polled. Economy unfairly benefits large corporations. Those are the top categories. But again, it's this. My point for bringing this all up is that it's we as a group here amongst the show are making a plea to a certain audience that that we have something valuable to offer. We have to do our own cultural storytelling, and because if people like us aren't getting out there and creating a counter narrative that combats this mindset that is around the modern definition of the American dream, where economic comfort is guaranteed, home ownership's guaranteed, a certain standard of living is guaranteed. That's a really far away stretch from what we were originally intended to be and have.
Well, the housing representative, the housing industry rep here, the thing that's so funny about that is what they're saying about the problems with affordability right now are all because of government intervention. So they want to have the government intervene more.
Correct.
They want to have the government intervene more, but the reason houses are so astronomically priced, number one, in the 50s, the government allowed the 30-year mortgage, which then homes became more affordable, quote unquote, which meant people could pay more for a house, which meant house prices went up. And of course, most recently, the absolute ridiculous over the top rise in house prices was when they artificially lowered the mortgage rates by buying billions of dollars of mortgage-backed securities every single day. That all of a sudden made financing cheap. And so now there was this bid for houses, and so housing prices skyrocketed. All that's the government's fault. So the fact that they want the government to intervene to make houses affordable, it's the government's fault that houses are expensive as they are. So how do you see that they're going to fix that?
Most people's understanding of insurance is based on someone else's misunderstanding of insurance. Most people's understanding of the housing market is based on someone else's misunderstanding of the house market, and they just have a loud voice.
Yeah.
Right? It's so easy for the correct personality to cause waves in our social media environment, in the way that we market information, that there's a lot of people who aren't thinking for themselves. And so but they're willing to get behind anything. Like, if you can get those people's votes, like, you can move mountains. It's really not that complicated. You just have to figure out what motivates these people, steer them in the right direction, and then you have a whole mob following you to go make things happen. But when I think about this economic comfort, what are we asking for? We're asking for, I don't want to be in debt, and I don't want to have to worry about making too much money. I want my needs to be met, and I want to be okay, right? Sweet. Well, what about home ownership? I want to live in the same spot and know that if I want to make a modification to that, I can make a modification to that. Okay, where could we get those things? We could get those things in prison, right? Like, our meals are being provided for us. We're going back to the same cell every single night. Like, how different is that than what we're asking for as a nation?
Well, and that's one of the things. Anytime somebody talks about that, I've gotten into conversations with friends who are of the socialist persuasion, then everybody should be equal. Okay, but if everybody has equal housing, not everybody's getting what they want. So if the government's paying for everybody's housing, everybody's going to be put in an apartment, right?
Yeah.
Like our friend was talking about in the Soviet Union, these massive apartment complexes where everybody had the exact same apartment, the same furnishings, everything. But I happen to want to have horses, and I'm okay with paying for that. But in this world, this crazy world of everybody as equal, like, nobody's actually going to want to let that 10% that actually are okay with that housing and being given to it. Everybody else is still going to be unhappy. So, like, this concept, how does this still live in the world that people think somehow the government can be Santa Claus?
Well, and Kyle, going back to what I didn't want to miss out on the opportunity to comment on what you said about the being here temporarily. Like, this is not your home, right? Like, come on. I think ultimately what you're saying is let's get our priorities straight, right?
Yeah, right.
But to the founders, freedom to them, this is what I wrote down. Freedom to them wasn't a permission slip; it was a burden of stewardship, right? And I think that burdens of stewardship is relevant when you tie it back into that premise of personal responsibility. It's the key. I mean, choosing courage over comfort and also accepting a level of personal responsibility does require some sacrifice, requires some level of uncomfort or discomfort. It requires delaying immediate gratification. A lot of the things that we as a society today are not maybe as prepared to do. Again, going back to that morality question, does it boil down to that was George A.I. right in what he said and what I read earlier? But the previous, so the founders' vision of the American dream, that the American dream was about liberty and self-determination, not lifestyle. Today, lifestyle, it's more about lifestyle outcome rather than a liberty framework. It's a material vision, not a constitutional one, where the dream, the American dream, is portrayed as something America owes its citizens rather than something citizens pursue within a system of liberty. So system of liberty is interesting to me because a system, one of the things that I think that our brand of financial advocacy around this show is an opportunity for people to discover that that financial sovereignty outside, in spite of the system. Like there's two different kinds of systems, right? There's a lot of people that are teaching or advising others, I can make you wealthier within the system by playing by the system's rules. And then there are people, God love you, like you guys that are a part of the show that says, you know what? You do need to know the rules. That's critically important. But what ultimately matters is that you understand how to develop your own system or systems that allows you the ability to have more and do it on your terms with maximum control.
That's where I would say that ownership has privileges.
Privileges?
Privileges, yeah. When we own the system, we have the ability to control the system, right? And if we are playing by someone else's rules and someone else's system, we're playing with the majority of other people, right? Yes, we can get ahead, but you look at the high-paid W-2 like doctors and lawyers and just the higher W-2 earners, they're paying so much in taxes. It's so sad. They're playing by someone else's rules. So they might have a comfortable lifestyle. They're paying a lot into the system. They're playing by someone else's rules. The people that we serve say, I want to make my own rules because I know if I make my own rules, I can play a game that I know that I can win, right? And obviously we live in a world where there is a construct that we have to operate within. We can't be illegal or anything like that. We don't advocate for any of that stuff, for tax avoidance or just any of that. We do not advocate for that stuff.
Right.
But when you look at, okay, what is the majority doing versus what could be done over here, if I own this section and I can move forward with this section, I have the privilege of writing my own rules. And when I do so, I can win the game.
We talk about books a lot when we end up with you. Have you read Ayn
That's
Rand's?
because his screen time is only, it's capped at 3.5 hours a day. And the rest of it is spent reading books.
Yeah, I read a lot.
Have you read Ayn Rand's The Virtue of Selfishness?
No, I haven't.
Great.
I have not read any of Ayn Rand's stuff.
Wow. Okay. So I've read them all. I think I've read them all. But one of the things I love about that is in there she talks about anti-altruism as this whole idea that government should be this benevolent gifter, right? Because again, if altruism is just let's steal money. Another great book was Amity Shlaes, The Forgotten Man, which is basically that A and B got together and decided that they wanted to help C, but they were going to do it by taking the money from D and giving it to C. You know, our current political. And so that kind of idea of altruism, look, we're helping this person. But her book on the virtue of selfishness is about basically, if you're a business owner or you have your own banking system and therefore you're going to make money by lending money, and then it ultimately is in your best interest to do good.
Mm-hmm.
If it gets out that you sell a crappy product, you aren't going to be in business for very long.
Right.
You know, if you aren't, you need to come up with ways to lend your money. So that's a good thing to do because you're helping somebody out who needs it.
Yeah.
And so her whole virtue of selfishness, ultimately you are doing it to profit, but in a beautiful way, because that fact that you make the most profit by doing the most good is way better than this weird, the government should just move everything around and supposedly knows who deserves it and who doesn't.
Well, that's the thing. Like, read Go Giver. If you've never read Go Giver, read Go
that's
Giver.
another good
Like,
one.
it's just so stinking solid.
Yep.
And when that's our philosophy, is how do we give and how do we serve, we can't help but accept that the fifth law within the book, the law of receiving, has to happen. You
Right.
cannot give without receiving. You
Right.
cannot take a breath without exhaling. If you exhale and you don't inhale, you ain't gonna be here long, right? So that it's natural. That's the way that our system, that our everything around us was set up to be. Is there's give and there's take,
Right.
and we somehow think that encouraging a government to be taking a lot and then giving is better. Why? They're not giving anything first. Like, they can't offer anything that they don't first take. I'm never going to support a friend who says, I have to take this from you over here before I give it to this person over here. Why would I ever support? That's crazy. But if this person says, I will give over here and give, and by doing so, I become somebody who other people want to give to, then yes, I will receive from them, but I never take from them. Like, it's never even a taking.
That's
situation.
the difference between a voluntary exchange versus a coercive one.
Oh, absolutely. And that's what the pension idea talks about.
Right.
Yeah.
Is you can't give anything that you don't first have. And if in order to have something you must steal it, you're not
Right.
You're not really serving anybody.
Well, and that was the thing that the founders, of course, understood, was this concept of ultimately everybody's responsible, but you know that responsibility is going to pour out in the communities and everything else.
Right.
I mean, that's why everything about the Constitution is actually about putting handcuffs on the government that unfortunately we don't bother to ever listen to anymore because we came up with a million bureaucracies that are completely unconstitutional, but that's neither here nor there. But, you know.
Except it's everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, true or false? As far as, okay, why this matters today, true or false? People intuitively sense the original American dream has been replaced and many want it back.
I think most people want it back, but they wouldn't be able to say why. There's something about personal responsibility, ownership. There's something about morality, discipline, faith, and character that is very satisfying. But we don't know how to get it. And we take the path of least resistance. And so if the government is offering something, if anyone's offering something and it makes me feel warm and fuzzy, I'm going to take it. Right? That's just our natural human tendency.
Right.
But it's so short-lived. So how do we say no to that stuff and then pursue the old original American dream? That's difficult.
So your answer is true. You would answer that true. You do believe people intuitively sense the original American dream has been replaced and many want it back.
Why are there so many books written on what is the meaning of man? What is the purpose of mankind? Look at Viktor Frankl's, right?
Man's Search for Meaning.
Yeah. And The Purpose-Driven Life by Rick Warren. There are so many people that are craving that purpose, but the modern day comforts and everything that makes life easy gets in the way of that stuff.
Well, and going back to courage, I think that it's because you feel like you're bucking the system if you actually say it out loud.
Yeah.
If you actually try to act that out and all of your neighbors are being like, no, I need to make sure I get a bigger, when we talk about taxes and stuff, the person who gets the refund and is so excited that they got a refund, I'm like, you do know that just meant you gave the government more of your money.
Yeah.
And they should have had, and now they're giving it back without interest. Like, but that's what people, and so they feel ashamed to be like, oh, I had to pay taxes this year. You know what I mean? Like, because that's bucking the system and doing things differently. And so, everybody feels it, but people are so afraid to actually state it or acknowledge
who's
it.
asking the questions? That's my other thing is like the people that are aware of this stuff, are they actually bringing it out? And people ask me like, what are you good at, Kyle? And I tell people, I build trust quickly. And then with those people, I push them straight out of their comfort zone and ask them questions that nobody else will be willing to ask. And we have really good conversations. And that's not just clients. That's everybody in my life. But the thing is, if you're observing a conversation that I'm having between me and somebody else, that person will be totally comfortable because they know that there's authenticity, there's safety, and everything else here. But watching it, the person who's watching it will often come to me and be like, I can't believe you said that. You should have never asked that question. That was so inappropriate. That was, so many different things. Because it feels uncomfortable because we're talking about things that people generally shouldn't talk about. Mm-hmm. But people want to talk about it. They just don't know how without feeling like they're bucking the system. And no one wants to buck the system. Like everyone.
I do.
I don't.
Well, like you said before, we want to be in our little herd and go along to get along.
I don't want to buck the system. If the system's going to set me up for failure, I want to figure out how to work better, right? Like I want to figure out how to not end up in failure. But it's not like it's this obstinate. I'm sorry if this is offensive, but this like numbskull approach is like whatever the system says, I'm gonna punch it in the face for saying that. Like that's the buck the system that I'm thinking about with all of this. Like, we don't want.
I get you.
I don't want to just be
contrary,
anti, right? But what's the truth, and how do we expose the truth? Who's asking the questions to bring that out, to make us think? Because we're not thinking if someone's not asking the questions.
I actually, you're right, and I'm in agreement with you. I said that just because
you're sick of the system.
No, it's just no. I here's the thing. Like, I'm not I'll just say this. I'm not an anti-government guy. I believe in proper government. I think there's a distinction between. I think government's necessary. I very much believe wholeheartedly that the reason why the founders created what they created was because they understood human nature, like you're talking about, right? Mm-hmm. Human nature is a very important subject and conversation to have because it's everything, right? So, but I just want things to be. I really want a fair playing field. And I recognize the more I understand and the more I learn, the more I recognize that we don't really have that. And all I want is an opportunity for people that have vision and have courage and are willing to accept personal responsibility. I want to give them the opportunity to step onto a fair playing field and kick ass and take names. That's what I want. Mm-hmm. And I don't think unfortunately in our industry, a lot of the information out there that is being pushed does actually support, it proliferates the system that exists at, the people, yes. Can people be okay following advice by the kind of conventional advice and play within the rules of the existing system? Yes, they can. People prove it every day, right? There are people that live to the end of life and have what they wanted and what they planned for, hoped for. But what I want is I want people to embrace the untapped potential inside of them to have so much more, to really be able to fulfill, you know, their creative energy and their God-given gifts to be actually bigger and better.
So I guess my question for you with that would be, how are you going to help them get there?
Take these glasses off first so I can look at you squarely.
Not cross-eyed.
Right.
How do you help them get there? I think we all want that for people, is to find their untapped potential. But how do we help them get there?
What we're doing right here, right now. This show, these conversations,
Challenging them.
the mission of everything, every time you drive down from Helena, Montana to this studio, the intention of your time and energy that you're giving to this show is to accomplish that. I want people to explode in a good way because of what we're providing to them. Like I want to open up a pathway. I want to create. I want to bring wagon masters on board like you and Karen to be able to lead these people to the promised land in this life, in this world.
Because it goes back to all those people who are sitting there and reading all those books because they really want that, but they're so afraid to actually say it or step into it because everybody around them, and the funny thing is the people around them might want that too, but nobody's talking about that. Everybody's talking about the score of the game and what are you getting your kids for Christmas? And these are the conversations they're having. And so they're thinking, well, I'm weird for trying to think those things, so I should just be quiet and go along. We want to give them a community where they can say, there are other people who actually think like me. To me,
and believe it or not, if you're worried more about creating health, wealth, and safety and financial security and building a world where you've got cash flow coming in and all that other stuff, you do have to forego a couple of those presents under the tree. It's just part of it.
That's the burden of stewardship.
Yeah, and so I look at it in two different elements, because you mentioned stewardship, so I'll go away from what I was just saying. There's owners and there's stewards. The stewards take care of the owner's stuff, right? Ownership has privileges. You get to control. The owner decides whether they want to give the ownership privileges to the stewards or if they just tell the stewards what to do. Right, so that there's two different kinds of stewards. There's the stewards that take care of something just because they're told to, and then there's the stewards that are empowered with ownership privileges of that. Think trustees of a trust. They have full decision-making abilities on every front to make decisions, to build equity, wealth, whatever it might be, relationships, it doesn't matter. Whatever they're stewarding, they can build all of that with their own decisions, because they've been given ownership privileges by the owner. And I think that one thing that we're not thinking about oftentimes in our culture is that we don't really own a whole lot of stuff. Sometimes we're given stewardship responsibilities and the opportunity to make decisions as stewards, and sometimes we're just told, go take care of X, Y, and Z. Don't ask, just do it.
Go on.
I want to be in that stewardship position where I have the ability to act on behalf of the owner and build for the greater good. But that takes personal responsibility. I'm a little bit on the hook. If I ruin it, I'm on the hook. Versus over here, if I'm stewarding someone else's thing, think like an employee for a company, I don't really have a whole lot of personal responsibility in the situation. If I screw this up, ultimately it's the name that I'm representing that's going to be in trouble. It's not me. When you look at the grand scheme of things, that's where a lot of people fall, is in that, I'm just doing my job as a steward of someone else's stuff, versus over here is I'm doing my job stewarding someone else's stuff, but I own every element of it, and I'm taking responsibility whether it fails or whether it succeeds. So does that make sense?
I'm going to ask that for the sake of time sensitivity, because I know you're on.
Yeah.
You need to. We have to watch the clock to get you out of here on time today. What I'm going to do, because I really am interested in this topic, and I want to take it deeper and further, but I don't want to get into it right now because we're time constrained. So what I'm going to do is table it. And the next time that you come down after the first of the year, I'm going to revisit this show content, and I'm going to make some notes, and I'm going to circle back to what you're talking about, because I think you just hit on a lot of really, I think, important things that deserve and demand further explanation and conversation around, because it's good stuff, but it's just not. I'm just not going to try to force it right now, because it deserves time. So, but I'm gonna put you as a true on that. People intuitively sense the original American dream has been
totally
replaced.
Way off on that.
Many right? You just say true or false.
Yeah, true.
True. Okay. True or false?
True.
So you, based on the conversations that you have with people and the sense that you get when you talk to people,
They have no idea they know it, but I know that as I talk to them deeply, they do know it. You have to help them realize that they know it, but they do. There is something in them that knows it and wants it. You were expecting us to both say false by your look.
no. I'm just
We threw him a curve.
No, you did not. No, I do want to believe that there is a growing interest in alternatives like infinite banking, and I want to see people. I want to see a renewed excitement around entrepreneurship, and I want people to understand the importance of decentralized finance, which is why
You're killing me, man, because there is an excitement about entrepreneurship. Like, it's never been higher.
Right.
The problem is nobody knows what entrepreneurship is.
Right.
We're creating this
definition.
idea of solopreneur. Mm-hmm. And entrepreneurship has gone way off the rails. Way off the rails. So we want to... I keep going back to 1984, George Orwell's
Yeah, sure.
book. And when we remove definitions and then redefine those words and then provide them back to the people,
words have meaning.
it's happening all over the place. But it's not through necessarily a controlled environment as much as it is the common narrative. It's a misunderstanding and a misappropriation of what is true, representing it as something that is not, and then being accepted by the general majority.
It's the Mandela effect. It's the thing that there was real truth at one point, but then somehow the narrative got changed, and then everybody believes the truth is now that. And then how you go from there, like, then all of a sudden everybody's like, no, that's what that commercial said. And then you actually go back and watch the commercial and you're like, oh my gosh, no, we can actually find the footage from the 80s. And that's not any of us believe what it actually said. But somehow we've all changed our collective thinking, which is kind of frightening. Collective thinking is very frightening because especially more with social media and all that kind of stuff, that all of that gets in there. I feel like he has more
Are
questions.
you still in there?
No, and here's the other thing is I've lived both lives.
Right.
I've been a W-2 guy, an employee, and I've had my own business. And let me tell you, it sucks both ways. It's fun both ways. It's wonderful both ways, and it's a total failure both ways. It doesn't matter. So I don't care about reinvigorating, and I'm sorry for this, I don't care about reinvigorating people towards entrepreneurship. That's already alive and well. I don't care about that. What I care about is helping people understand about ownership. If we can't understand the value of ownership and what that means and how that translates to everything else, it doesn't matter whether we're entrepreneurs or W-2 employees.
Well, there's a reason that property, like life, liberty, and property, only they changed it to pursuit of happiness, but that's because of the slavery thing. But property was so important as part of our founding.
Yep.
Property ownership.
Intellectual property.
Yeah, all of it.
Physical
Anything, yeah.
property, land property.
Well, man, we're starting a lot of conversations we can't finish. But I think the only thing I would say, and I'm cool with everything that you both are saying. The only thing I would say about the reason why I mention entrepreneurship is because I think that what we have to have is we have to do multiple things, right? We have to get people to understand how to become more decentralized in our access to capital, not more centralized. And I think that's a healthy thing, a good thing, that we need to help people understand how to accomplish that. But I think the other thing is that I think that we need to have a debt conversation at some point about talking about there is a difference between consumer debt and collateralized debt. Right. Okay. So for our banking system, gosh darn it, our banking system sets people up for this modern version of the American dream of consumerism and a debt-driven society, but it's not productive in nature. When I say that there's a growing interest in entrepreneurship, what I want to see happen is I want to see more people understand that having access to capital is really vital when you put it to use, like you've talked about. It's not just good enough to just set your policies up and just sit on them. It's how do you deploy that capital? How do you use that capital at a from the concepts of subsidiarity, right? The sort of the local representation, the decentralized nature of finance. How do you put that capital to work and in motion in a local economy to really grow opportunity for everybody around you?
That's true, and that's fine because like you might be a W-2 employee, but if you have a policy, on some level you're on being a bit of an entrepreneur and what you're doing with that policy to be able to go out and do other things. So you might not see yourself as that way, but there's a component of that to it. So
Well, and that's what I look at too, is what is the original definition of an entrepreneur? And an entrepreneur originally, economically, was somebody who saw the needs of the future and was able to meet it. Not everybody has that vision. Not everybody has courage to stand behind the vision.
Right.
So an entrepreneur is the one that takes a risk for the future, knowing or at least believing that they can recoup their investment in the form of cash flow, whatever it might be. Entrepreneurship now today means owning your own business, selling your own thing, whatever. There's so many different ways that people take entrepreneurship. W-2 employees who own the banking function can go be entrepreneurs by recognizing a need and preparing and meeting that need before that need arises. So if I recognize a need among a particular group of people, let's just say a rancher. This rancher needs an operating loan, an annual operating loan of $100,000.
Yep.
They can either go to the bank and say
beg the banker for that.
Right. And they could say, hey, I want $100,000. Can I get a 5% loan? Maybe the bank will say yes. Maybe they'll say no. But the bank will come back, and generally speaking, at least in ag, those are 1-year notes, which means that the 10% is required at the end of the year, the $10,000 plus the capital. So $110,000 you got to pay back by the end of the year. I can recognize that need and say, hey, farmer, I'll charge you 15% interest, but I won't require you to pay me the capital. So I'll give you $100,000 today, and as long as you pay me $15,000 at the end of the year,
keep the line open.
Yeah, keep the line open.
Yeah.
I recognize a need.
Yeah.
I'm providing the need. It's helping them succeed. They're not having to go back through underwriting and all that other stuff, and I'm getting $15,000 a year. And I'm still working my job at whatever, W-2. It doesn't matter. That is entrepreneurship. Recognizing the need, providing for the need before it arises, and then making that come true.
Yeah, but here's one more critical component to that you didn't mention. This is kind of what I'm trying to drive home with our brand of financial advocacy is the difference between your comparative example is you're a rancher, you go to your local bank and get that operating line of credit. You're contributing to the inflationary effect of the economy by devaluing your own dollar, which makes your own living expenses. You're disrupting your standard of living at the same time that you're borrowing from the central banking system. Versus if that same rancher goes and borrows from you, that's one opportunity to not have one more loan in the system that further enhances that inflationary effect.
Oh, right. Yeah.
From an economic standpoint. So the thing that we don't understand, even it's the lesser of two evils, is if you go to a bank and you take a loan for productive purposes, for business purposes, you're a rancher, you go to a bank and you get it, and your goal is to use that money for productive purposes. That's still better than somebody that goes to a bank and gets a loan for strictly purely for consumptive purposes. But it's not a zero sum game. It's not a this or that. It's there's option C. Option C is a Kyle Reese that sits in front of you and says, you know what? You can still you can take the loan, and you could avoid the inflationary effect on the economic system by by doing it this way. Mm-hmm. That's the conversation that not enough people are having. And that's what this show has to drive to more people and get people to understand, where the real opportunity exists. Sorry, really hitting the table.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, hey, I totally agree with you, but I would also argue that in order to meet that point, what folks in the Nelson Nash Institute have said, namely Carlos Lara and Nelson Nash, and we've got to reach a 10% majority a 10% of the population of America that feels that way before we hit that tipping point.
Right.
And it's difficult to do that because, let's just say I go lend $100,000 to 10 farmers. That's $1 million out. That's a lot for anybody to lend out. That's nothing compared to the ag market.
Right.
How do we find enough people to go out and do that? That's difficult.
It's the starfish analogy.
Mm-hmm.
Karen,
First you got to start here.
please share.
Well, you know the story of the starfish, where all the starfish have washed up on the beach, where obviously they can't live, and the guy's going out and picking up starfish and throwing them back in, and the guy comes and he looks at the scattered beach and goes, "Why are you bothering? What does it matter?" And he said, "Well, it matters to this one," as he throws that one back in. You are still making a difference in anybody's life, and eventually, if enough people start doing that, the power hopefully builds and we hit that number.
Absolutely, but inflation is going to continue to happen.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And it's more than just this.
Yep.
Yeah, it is.
I meant to ask you we should have done the Todd's Bar Smart inflation thing, but I forgot to get into it.
She keeps blanking out.
By the way, we were at the very first Night of Clarity event that Carlos Lara and what's the other guy's name all hosted down in Nelson was there, but
David Stearns, which is Nelson's son-in-law, and Bob Murphy. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
We went to
in Nashville. It was really cool.
We went to Carlos's house.
That was pretty cool.
He's apparently likes Greek architecture. He's got
Yeah.
That's very neat.
He's a great guy.
Awesome. It was so much fun. Yeah. But because you brought that up, I was like, all right, we got Nelson Nash's signed book. I'm like, we got it in at the right time.
Yeah. Anyway, we have a lot to talk about after the first of the year.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do.
So, this was an interesting show. The American dream turned into a treadmill I'm going to end it on this.
Okay.
All right. So today, the American dream in most people's minds is a treadmill. You can have it. You can have the American dream, but only if you borrow heavily and pledge loyalty to institutional systems. This is a major break from the founders' vision of independent, self-governing citizens. What I want to do, what we're going to do, is we're going to help people that choose to follow the show and grow with us. Is we're going to create more independent, self-governing citizens.
You bet.
That's what we're doing. Thanks for coming down.
Yeah.
Now I gotta run back to Montana. I had my